The Israel-Palestine conflict has been making news headlines across the globe. While traditional news mediums such as broadcast, television, radio and print remain widely consumed, over the past 2 weeks the digital sphere has taken center stage. It gave a space for direct, unfiltered documentation of the realities on the ground, a means for disseminating information in many different forms and formats, and a platform for amplifying messages and gestures of solidarity. As the events unfolded, tech giants come under spotlight over censorship, disinformation and manipulation concerns. What role has social media played in spreading of falsehoods about the situation between Palestine and Israel? Joining us to discuss this is Media Monitoring Africa Head of Programs, Tandy Smith. Tandy, a very good morning. Tell us about social media and certainly the role that it's played in this Palestine debacle.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So I think, what's important to note in this situation is that we're dealing with a conflict that is possibly the most contentious in the world. And along with that comes, huge amounts of emotion and anger and, violence. And so it creates the perfect storm for disinformation across social media platforms. But, when it comes to social media, I think what's important to understand is that this isn't the only example of how mis and disinformation plays out across social media channels. It's disinformation on social media has become a viral problem. And any time that you have a particular crisis, a particular conflict, you do see disinformation explode across a number of different platforms.
Tandy, I'm gonna interject if you'll allow me. Misinformation and disinformation, are they used interchangeably? Do they mean the same thing?
No, they don't. Mis and disinformation are two fundamentally different issues. Misinformation could be defined as the sharing of false information, and that could be the unintentional sharing of false information. So, you could be on WhatsApp and get a message from your grandmother who warns you about the potential violence, which turns out to be false. Now, she is not at fault of spreading disinformation because that, even though it was false, it was shared unintentionally to be false. When we're dealing with disinformation, it becomes an entirely different story where it's specifically and intentionally shared to cause harm, and specifically to cause public harm. So disinformation, the difference there is that it is deliberately shared to cause public harm, and to invoke that emotion and invoke that anger. So they are two fundamentally different things.
Now, in April, a video of teenagers in East Jerusalem slapping two Orthodox Jewish boys on public transport went viral. The police picked up on it, and the boys were arrested. So obviously, these are some of the positives of social media.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of positives when it comes to social media and the internet. And this is why issues around digital literacy are so important, because you have to be able to understand the dangers and mitigate the dangers and do something about, playing your part in minimizing the harm of disinformation, and seeing that the internet is there it is a platform where a lot of good can happen. And we've seen this as well. And we've seen, how the internet has allowed for first-hand encounters of situations and stories. But we have to create awareness around these issues, because, like I said, you have to be able to understand the dangers and use it for the advantages that the platforms are there for.
Now, we've talked about the positives. Let's talk about the negatives, some of the instances that have come out of this Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
I said we've obviously talked about the positives, but you are aware of certain instances of disinformation regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Can you take us through some of those?
Well, I think that when you're talking about disinformation, it's difficult to pinpoint specific issues. I think what's important to understand is that, as I was saying in the beginning, it's the perfect storm for disinformation to be shared on a number of different platforms. And when it comes to such a politically contentious and emotional issue, such as the conflict in Israel and Palestine, we see these flare-ups of disinformation, and it's exactly these reasons that you shouldn't just rely on your social media platforms for information about what is going on, and not only in this conflict, but around any issue across the world. And this is why we need that credible media, and that role of the media is still so fundamentally important.
I suppose the challenge with the social media is verification of credible information, because if somebody tweets or posts something and it's supposed to be live, it's happening in Jerusalem, rockets are flying overhead, the chances of us verifying are a huge challenge, firstly, and secondly, it spreads ever so quickly.
I mean, exactly. This is one of the biggest issues around disinformation, and this is also why, digital platforms have become a tool to see what's happening firsthand on the ground in these conflict zones, and this is where it has become an advantage. But this is exactly an opportunity for credible media to see this footage, to see. To get these first-hand accounts, but then still do their investigation and still do their homework into what is actually going on. Because the minute you have credible media relying on your social media platforms for information, that just blurs the water even more. So, when you do see these first-hand encounters, these videos taken by citizens or, public members witnessing this firsthand, there's still that job of credible media to investigate and to tell the full story.
Tandy, thank you for your time this morning.